Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Greater Washington Urban League's On Track radio broadcast. I'm your host, Roland Turner, and this morning we've got a very serious but exciting show. I'm so excited because I'm so happy to welcome in our studio this morning Xavier Snow. And Xavier is our guest host this morning, and he serves as the Greater Washington Urban League's project coordinator of the Contact Tracing Awareness Program. So with that said, Xavier is here to tell us all about the League's new program on COVID-19 and contact tracing. With that said, good morning, Xavier. How are you?
Good morning, Roland. Thank you for having me.
Yes, indeed. I'm so happy and proud to be able to turn the show over to you as a guest host. So with that, you can take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Roland. This is Xavier Snow, as mentioned. I am the project coordinator for the Greater Washington Urban League's Contact Tracing Project. And today I have the privilege of sitting down with a distinguished guest, Michael Charles Durant, pastor of the 10th Street Baptist Church and president, Baptist Convention of the District of Columbia and vicinity. We will introduce the League's COVID-19 Contact Tracing Awareness Program, but first, we will set the context by diving into a discussion of the virus known as COVID-19. Stay tuned for an amazingly informative broadcast. Pastor Durant's initial sermon as pastor of 10th Street was 1988. That's 32 years ago. As a 27-year-old millennial myself, I can honestly say, while I don't consider myself religious, I do consider myself spiritual. I'm inspired by your commitment and faith. As someone whose day-to-day responsibilities are being concerned with the spiritual development of a person, why is it important for people to maintain strong spiritual health, especially in times like this, especially as it relates to the Black community?
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where someone is in the world. First of all, it's important because whether we're talking about mental health or physical health or financial health, all of it has a spiritual base. And so, of course, my contention is that's where it begins. Our spiritual perspective has to do not only with time, but with eternity. And if we don't have either a perspective or concern for ourselves in the broader sense, then the more contracted senses of our physical being and those things will be less significant to us. So what I've endeavored to do is to focus persons on their spiritual well-being and their total well-being as an outgrowth of that, which is why after this I want to talk about that being religious and spiritual comment. I think we can have a discussion about that.
I'm open. Right. Definitely. So one thing is our community as a whole is particularly at high risk. There is one group that is constantly seen as compromising the overwhelming majority of terminal victims, the elderly. Can you please describe why it's so important to look after our elderly during this pandemic?
It's important to look after our elderly all the time, but particularly during this pandemic because, as you have said, they are most vulnerable. They're not just most vulnerable in terms of being physically weakened just by age, but in terms of access to information, mobility, and so many other things kind of put them in the crosshairs. Financial issues make them more vulnerable. And so the church and other entities have to make special efforts to reach out. And then there is the piece where, some of our seniors say, I've had members say to me, well, Pastor, I'm this many years old and I'm just not, whatever time I got left, I'm going, and so trying to make it clear to them right. that, however much time you have left, you want to have a quality of life as well. And so it's important to stress to them the importance of protecting themselves. But when it comes to protecting our elderly, the real challenge I found is convincing grandchildren and great-grandchildren and nieces and nephews and others that they need to be concerned about their elderly relatives. And that concern doesn't mean just not going to see them, but being concerned about their behaviors because they expose them or run the risk of exposing them unnecessarily.
I think that's a great point, and I kind of want to touch on that as far as the youth. Do you mind discussing more about some of the challenges that you've had with reaching out to the youth and getting them to, follow the protocols, if any?
It is it's interesting because I've seen both dynamics. I've seen young people who are just completely unconcerned and cavalier, and then I've seen in equal numbers young people who are diligent. We were engaged daily with the protests in the height of the George Floyd murder and the renaming, of section of the city, Black Lives Matter Plaza, and all of that. They're daily, and most of those that we were around were young people who were very, very diligent with wearing masks and practicing social distancing as best could be in that environment. And I think the record indicates, that there were not outbreaks. Contact tracing would indicate that those persons who came from other places didn't carry it back. Whereas in other instances where persons weren't wearing masks and so forth, where there were mass gatherings, that was not the case. And so from young people across racial lines, I've seen a tremendous amount of at least in those environments where they were addressing, issues that were important socially and so forth. Now, I have not had a lot of interaction with young people in their social settings. I'm a little beyond that now. And so, but from my children, I see that they and their friends seem to be acting responsibly. But when they don't, it is really, really bad. And those are the ones you just want to, grab and shake, and have them to understand that this is important, not just to them, but to their entire community. That becomes the ongoing challenge.
Okay. I appreciate that response. And to be honest, I'm not socially hanging out with young people either, so we're on the same page with that.
Well, you're socially and consistently hanging out with young people because you are, and so until you can separate from yourself, you're always in the presence of a young person.
Great point. Now, one of our mutual friends, Mr. Ronald Frazier, mentioned how different it is being in an empty church and singing to what amounts to an iPhone or a camera, essentially being broadcast to an entire congregation of people. What are some of the unforeseen challenges this pandemic has brought to your life as a pastor, and how have you been able to adjust?
Well, let me take the last part of it first. Adjusting, because it is always an adjustment. It is the worship experience in the African American tradition is call and response. That is the lifeblood of the Black church. Even churches that we may have referred to as dead or dry, or there is that feature. And so to be in virtually, no pun intended, but to be in an empty building, singing and preaching, and trying to, my desire has been trying to create as normal worship experience for those who are watching as if they were there. And so while some pastors have, they'll do it from their kitchen table or from their sofa, I've intentionally gotten up on Sunday morning, dressed for church, suited and booted, and went to and preached as if the church was full, or endeavored to do that. Mm. And what I did not anticipate in the beginning is how different that dynamic would be without having anyone there to say, and we've been doing this for 6 months, and I don't know if it's, I have not discovered the secret, if there is some magic formula for it, or if I'm just inadequate, but I can't get that camera to say amen to save my life. It's just there. And so you try to imagine in your mind, you try to sense in your spirit how those who are watching, and then there is the thing that while you're in the moment, everyone who sees it may not actually see it when it's happening, and so all of those things are going on. So it's a day-to-day, week-to-week adjustment. What it has taught me is that all of us, not just me as a preacher or as a pastor, but all of us, this pandemic has taught me that all of us have capacities beyond what we thought. And it challenges us to think creatively, and it doesn't give us an option. We can think creatively and say, well, no, I won't do that. But in this environment, you have to come up with ways of being effective, because the work is too important to just be left until, there is some magic cure or whatever. And so you have to find ways to effectively reach people, to minister to them. The needs of people have not gone away because of COVID-19. Right. The everyday needs, people are still getting sick of other illnesses. Babies are still being born. Young folk are still falling in love and wanting to get married. People are still dying. There are babies to be dedicated, new homes to be blessed, all of those things. And so you have to find creative ways of doing that are meaningful, because just to say, all right, we're going to do this digitally. And I've stopped using the word virtual. We talk about virtual worship. Virtual means almost real. Our worships are real. Our classes are real. So they're just done digitally. So I've made a conscious effort to stop using the word virtual and use the word digital. Those are some of the things that I've learned, and those have been some of the challenges. One of the greatest challenges of every pastor is that because people are watching by the iPhone or the desktop or their smart TVs, is that unlike if you're at 10th Street on Sunday morning, if you're in the building, that's where you are. Right. But in an hour, our congregants, are there's channel surfing now. They're church surfing. They can get a piece of this and a piece of that and a piece of the other, all in that hour and a half time. So that can be challenging, because I've had a couple of members repeat back to me something that they said that I said in the sermon when I had not said that, but they got mixed up as to whose stream they were watching.
Oh man!
Or who said what, and so those are some of the challenges. But we continue to evolve and to learn and to grow.
Absolutely. Now, prior to this interview, we spoke briefly, and you said something that was really interesting. You mentioned that churches are one of the most underused resources in the Black community. Can you kind of touch on that a little bit? Why is that important?
Historically, whenever you wanted information disseminated in the community, whenever you needed boots on the ground in the community, the place that you went to rally that support, to get that information out, was the Black church. And unfortunately, at least from my perspective, as it relates to the efforts of government and other organizations, the Black church has been underutilized in both bringing people together, and when I say that, I don't necessarily mean in the same space, but bringing them together around an effort or a cause, disseminating information to them, the church has not been used, which is why I believe our community is underinformed. On Sunday mornings before the pandemic, even with declining attendance, there were across any city, any state, across the nation, more Black folk in church than anywhere else at that given time.
Wow.
And so if the information is given, that information is gotten. Now that we are streaming and using various digital platforms and websites and Facebook pages and Instagram and TikTok and all of that, if organizations with information that wanted to get that information out partnered with churches and individual local congregations and denominations for links and video vlogs and all of that, that information could be gotten. And not only that, but would probably be more positively responded to. People in the community, for the most part, even those that don't go to church, generally trust the church, or they'll trust the information that they're given as it relates to their well-being. But that, unfortunately, at least as I observe, has not happened, or not happened to the extent that it should. Whatever the criticisms and critiques of the Black church have been within the Black community, when anyone in that community is in need, the first place they go to, the first place they look to, is the church.
Right.
If there is, if someone's burned out, if whatever it is, they look to the church. And in the same way, they look to the church for information. And I just don't think the entities who have the information, who've tried to convey it, they could have been and would be much more successful if they partnered with churches to get that information out and to keep a steady stream of information. Because to say something to somebody one time, or for them to catch it on the news in the midst of a whole lot of other stuff, it may not stick. So that's just my feeling.
Right. So in terms of this contact tracing program that we're currently working on with the Urban League, would you say that reaching out to churches is a good way for us to get our information out there?
I think that more than good, it would be invaluable to you.
Okay.
Again, as I said, there is nothing that can reach Black folk like the Black church. You may have a household, and in that household, it may only be, since we were talking about our elderly before, it may only be grandma that goes to church, But when grandma goes back home, what she heard that she knows is important to her family is going to be communicated to all of them. Or if you have a household where everyone attends church, then all of them have that information, and it will be disseminated. And now, with persons worshiping digitally, it is not only what they hear, but it's preserved. It's archived, and so they can go back, and those connections can be made where churches can text information to their congregants, email it, and so not to use it as a resource, I think is unfortunate. And so my hope is that, as I said to you, that the Urban League in launching this will partner with the church so that people, because many people in our community, they recognize the term contact tracing,
Right.
But they don't really know what that is or how it works. And it sounds like something other, and so we just push it to the side. They don't realize that it's, fairly simple, just, requires some consciousness about yourself.
Exactly.
But again, it needs to be heard over and over again. And the church is an excellent resource for that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So with all that's going on right now, why is it so important to have religion in your life?
It's important because it is our relationship with God that centers us, that gives us both perspective and power to persevere. Otherwise, we're rudderless. There's an old song that says, "Without God, I could do nothing. Without God, I would surely fail. Without God, life would be rugged, and I'd be like a ship without a sail." And so religion, our spiritual relationship with one another and with God, is what will get us through this. A vaccine and stimulus packages and all of those things are good. But the reality is that what people will need to sustain them after this is a spiritual connection. And so when you feel hopeless, when you feel afraid, where do you go for that? There's no vaccine for that. There is no stimulus check for that. That is found in one's relationship to God. And a sustained relationship with Him will sustain you through anything.
Amen. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
So there has been some discrepancies as far as the policies given to our community from a government standpoint. Do you feel as though the policies have been fair to the Black community?
This might not go down well. I think that that overall there is a lesser level of concern for our community. Particularly in this administration, it pains me to say, but I think that there is a kind of, well, that's them. And so resources don't come to our community as quickly. They don't remain in our community as long. And I do not think that that is necessarily by accident. So when you see what is going on in our community, as that, I think that this whole push to reopen and so forth started when there was when the stats started being released, and it became clear that we were being adversely affected at greater rates statistically. And so since we were the more at risk, then it was less necessary to go to the extremes that were once thought. As I said, I would not dogmatically declare that, but that is a sense that I have when I see some of the things that have happened. And I do think that our community has been neglected, or many of our communities have been neglected, because there is a lesser concern for the well-being of minorities and people of color.
Wow, that's deep. Now, as we wrap up, Pastor, is there any final words that you would like to leave for us today?
Let me just give you some sage advice. Don't ever ask a preacher if there's any, because you may never get out of here. No, I want to thank you, first of all, for including me in this discussion, and hopefully both our church and our organization. I'll be coming out of office shortly, but the Baptist Convention of D.C. and vicinity is more than willing to do whatever it can, because we're here to serve our people. And I think that the blessing of this pandemic, if that phrasing is acceptable, the blessing has been that the Black church has been able to demonstrate to its community that it really is there for them. That in spite of all of the things that have happened, because there are always those who said, the church is just about, getting the money and all of that. That's not been what this season has been about, but the church has been there nonetheless, feeding and ministering to and helping and supporting and crying with those who have suffered from this pandemic. I sit here, I know personally, not just heard, I know personally 30 persons who have succumbed, and I know over 100 who have contracted COVID-19. And so I know the pain of it, but I also know that our churches have been there for its community and beyond, along with giving aid and support as we have addressed the other unrest that is acute, as it relates to racial unrest and the political insanity that we seem to be in the midst of right now.
Absolutely.
And unless I take a text, I think I'll stop that.
Well, Pastor, thanks again for speaking with us
you
today, and we really appreciate your insight.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Xavier Snow, for guest hosting On Track this morning. I, along with the listeners, we learned so much about the COVID-19 Contact Tracing Awareness Program. On behalf of the entire Greater Washington Urban League staff, our president and CEO, George H. Lambert Jr., and yours truly, your producer and host, Roland Marie Turner, we thank you for listening to On Track on WPGC Radio. On Track is a community service of the Greater Washington Urban League and WPGC Radio. If you have any questions, concerns, we also welcome all of your show ideas. Give us a call at 202-265-8200. That's 202-265-8200. Our website address is www.gwul.org. That's www.gwul.org. Once again, I'm Roland Turner, and please have a productive day.